Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam. Good morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Let's see. Today is Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. I got it right. I'm about 2 weeks in of getting the date right. I remember the date because this date was set a couple of weeks ago to bring this great young man into the Java Cafe. Got a few minutes to talk with him before we started this morning. And as I felt of my time with texting with him and seeing his tweets and what he stands for, what he cares about, and his faith, just speaking with him this morning, affirmed some things for me. And we may or may not share that, but it's definitely awesome to get ready to introduce this great young man. I'll get the poly stuff out the way. He's a major mover and shaker in Boston, Mass Poly, a communications guy that goes all the way back to our first Black governor, Deval Patrick, and spent some time with him on the campaign and also in the administration. And we just connected, I think, late last year, earlier this year. But we've had a lot of intersectionality through some of the folks that he has helped champion to be our great advocates in the persons of, let's start with our Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, and then also our mayor, Michelle Wu, and currently working with Tanisha Sullivan as well, who's running for Secretary of State. But away from that, and that is very important, I say curated, he says created, but he brought us together in a space on Twitter where he talks about the faces of COVID. Many of us over the last couple of years have watched CNN and Johns Hopkins report numbers. And while numbers are important because they could have been lower, these are people. These are loved ones. These are people who have legacies. And so it gives me a great pleasure, not necessarily, and I told him, you know, the topic is interesting, but I understand, and he does as well, spaces like this are needed because as a world, as humanity, we have, I won't say lost, we have experienced a lot of our loved ones transitioning. And so it is definitely awesome to bring this great young man into the room. We had a earlier conversation, so I think we're going to do our best to keep ourselves together this morning. But Alex, sir, good morning. When I tell you, I've had a lot of people on my screen here, but when I say I am very seriously, sincerely honored to have someone like you in the room that has been such an influence in many areas. But this latest venture, this latest creation and curating of space around people is not really far from, you know, your values and things that you care about. So I told you I would give you a wonderful introduction and welcome. But good morning, sir. Say hello to the Java fam. And we're going to, I didn't send him any bullets. We're just going to free flow and talk about a few things.
Amazing. Good morning, Java fam. Good morning, Jimmy. It is really an honor to be with you. And let me just say, you're talking about creating spaces that we really need right now. This is a space that we really, really need right now. And it has been a special privilege to watch this platform grow. And I'm grateful to finally have a moment to be a part of it with you.
I am glad to have you here, sir, as I do with all my guests for the first time, because this is your first time, not last time. But tell us a little bit about yourself. You mentioned that you started out, when we talked, started out with Governor Patrick as far as comms. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and then we're going to talk about how you came to the decision to maybe what started maybe as a hashtag and evolved into this space where people come and celebrate the lives of their loved ones.
Absolutely. So yeah, a little bit about me. I currently live in Waltham, beautiful Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm right over the border from where I grew up, on the north side of Newton, sort of in the warm embrace of Boston's Jewish community. Was really how I grew up, and went to Brandeis University right down the road. I really spread my wings and went 5 minutes from where I grew up. I went to Brandeis in Waltham. And then my senior year of college, I basically didn't go to class because I signed up to be a grassroots field organizer on Deval Patrick's first campaign for governor back in 2005, and organized through the caucuses. And everyone was telling me, oh, that'll be a fun little project, but he's not going to win. Like, you'll move on to the next thing. And fast forward, 6 or 7 months later, he becomes governor of Massachusetts, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life. And went through a number of different roles with him, eventually became the press secretary for his reelection campaign, and then in the governor's office as spokesman, and then started my own shop back in 2016, focused on communications and working with great causes and candidates, and do a lot of work on the climate crisis, on economic empowerment, on equity, and sort of love telling stories and putting real people at the center of abstract policy. I think that's something I've learned from people like Deval Patrick and Ayanna Pressley, who I had the privilege of working with. But also what I learned most from them was how to be an empathetic communicator and to speak to people and with people and meet them where they are, and not, in abstract talking points.
So I started to put in a tweet yesterday, like, Alex is my low key like idol, because I've seen the impact. I've seen the impact, and I know the folks that you have worked with, and we share values. And so awesome of what you've been doing. Let me ask you this, because I share my story all the time. Where were you? What was the first iteration of Faces of COVID? And in that, you can tell us why you decided to proceed with it, but set whatever context you want, sir. Tell us, as the preacher say, tell us the story, paint the picture, doc, all of that. Let us know, sir.
Yeah. So I think the Faces of COVID started because I was looking just on my own, watching what was unfolding outside the window. I was looking for a way to process what we were learning in those early, dark, scary days of the pandemic. And, as you pointed out in the opening, the initial story, and frankly, the story that was told through most of the pandemic and is still being told from the public health perspective, has been focused on statistics, and understandably so. Statistics tell us a lot about what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and what we need to do to protect ourselves. But the story itself was a data-driven story. It was about ventilators. It was about hospitalizations. It was about, eventually became the number of deaths. And, the whole mantra in the beginning of the pandemic was flatten the curve, right? And all of that stuff was really important, but it was missing, I believed, a really huge part of the story, which was, who are the people behind these numbers? Because behind every single one of them was a real person who had dreams and challenges, and family who loved them, and communities who relied upon them. And I remember seeing the headlines and feeling like this doesn't feel real. Like, it's so abstract. And I personally was just looking to know. I wanted to know, who are these people? And so I started doing, research on my own, looking for local news stories, looking for obituaries, and found quite a few right away of families that were already speaking publicly that they had lost somebody to COVID, and started to just share them as I found them. And it turns out I wasn't the only person who was looking for that, right? Who felt like the data story was not the full story. And that there was a much more important story that we need to tell when we're telling the history of this pandemic, about the lives of the people that we've lost. And you know what? Like, more than anything, in the beginning, it was just, I felt like people deserved an affirmation of the basic dignity of the life that they lived, right? That it is not enough to reduce people to this many cases, this many deaths, that their families deserve more. and that we needed to know who they were. And so I just started doing it, not necessarily for anybody else, but for myself, because I needed it, right? And then, it turns out there was a lot of other folks looking for that as well.
I thank you for giving the context, and we share a lot of the foundation of Faces of COVID with Java with Jimmy as being a resource. And you say you did it, necessarily may not necessarily have been just for you, but it wound up being a community service. And so where were you? Either in your living room, on the train, in a meeting? Was it a hashtag at first, or what what was the beginning? I know what my beginning was, and it didn't look like this. And so what was the beginning, sir?
The beginning for me was Waltham is a pretty densely populated, city outside of Boston. We have very quickly the pandemic hit real hard right here, and I could hear the sirens wailing throughout the day. And I actually I found a way to access the police and fire scanner because I wanted to understand what was happening. And because I was hearing these sirens, I was seeing ambulances all throughout the neighborhood and stuff. And every single call was shortness of breath, possible COVID, shortness of breath, possible COVID. And it was real. Like it was, you could see the EMTs on the block. Right. And that night, I think it was March 28th, is after, 2 weeks basically of absorbing what was happening out there, was when I was like, you know what? I had been sharing some of these stories on my personal Twitter feed. And I said, first of all, a lot of people didn't sign up. Like I want people to opt into the experience of interfacing with these stories, because it can be traumatic and triggering and all kinds of things for folks that didn't sign up to see story after story of people who had passed away. And so I created the branding Faces of COVID because I really wanted it to be something where you knew what you were going to see, and wanted people to be able to opt into that experience. And so started at the night of the 28th of March, 2020. And I have only missed 4 or 5 days since in the last 2 years. And most of those 4 or 5 days was after my own father passed away in July 29th, 2021. And I had to take a couple days off, I think understandably, but it has become, what's interesting about Faces of COVID is what started as something that I thought was to try to play a role in the public conversation, to put real names and faces behind these statistics, to hold people accountable for policy failures. I think all of those things were very real. What it became over time, in addition to that, and actually sort of supplanted those as the most important thing for me, was it became a place where families who have been deprived the basic rituals of saying goodbye to a loved one. Maybe they had to say goodbye via Zoom or FaceTime because they weren't allowed in the hospital, or maybe they couldn't have the wake or the funeral or the Shiva or whatever, community ritual that they would have undertaken because it wasn't safe to do so. And so they had to say goodbye to their loved one alone or with just a few folks around. They did not have that embrace of community. And then they had to go home and watch the world kind of move on while they had to stay in the isolation of the four walls of their home. And that Faces of COVID became a place where you could mourn publicly, right? And where people, one of the most important things I found was that it was where you could mourn with strangers, because, people right now are fed so much, fear of each other. We see it a lot in the political space, and certainly with our prior president, who was here for most of the pandemic. What people I found are looking for is just a affirmation that we still care about each other, right? And so Faces of COVID became this place where families can post their stories, and over 2,000 families have submitted stories to Faces of COVID since I started it. And it's a place where they can mourn with a bunch of people who they didn't know, who are going to tell them back to them, your loved one meant something, they mattered, they lived a life that had purpose, and we all lost something because they're no longer here. And I think that's something a lot of people still need to hear. There's so many people out there. We're about to hit 1 million confirmed deaths probably in the next 2 weeks. The amount of people that impacts, who are suffering and carrying this, is extraordinary. I don't think we've even begun to process what that level of loss means. And part of what I think we need to process it is to be able to look into the eye of people that we don't know and tell them we love them and that we've lost something because their loved one isn't here.
So Alex, I did well. I kind of snuck it off, but I got this here just in case, because there is so much commonality. I started March 24th. You started March 28th.
Wow.
And though different, one of the tenets that the platform evolved into was holding space for those that lost loved ones. Like, I was on camera many a day those first couple of months, hearing about and trying to do the show and just bawling.
Yeah.
And so, from someone that understands it, and others do as well, I feel in the moment right now, want to say thank you, because what you just talked about exuded humanity, exuded caring and understanding. And I'll end with this, because you affirm what is a foundational tenet of Java with Jimmy. I say this often: love is the foundational thing. Even if we have to love from a distance or practice tough love, if love serves as the foundation, we're good. And so much of what you talked about, again, goes back to humanity, especially with what we have going on in the world now. One of the things that you mentioned was rituals. There are certain rituals in African American community, and there are certain rituals in the Jewish community, which leads me to wonderfully highlight, because my faith and belief is based on the foundation of your faith and belief. And so, talk a little bit about faith, sir. And well, let me back into this. You're a comms guy, so I'm trying to be on point, sir. This is heavy. This is a lot of heavy work. And so we also talk here about mental health, and you mentioned it as well. How do you cope? And there's a presumption that your faith helps, but it's heavy to facilitate this, to look at, you don't, as I said in the pre-convo, we don't just hear the stories, you post and you turn the computer off or shut your phone off and it just goes. How do you deal with the weight that comes with holding this space, such needed space?
I found out over the last 2 years, I set out thinking maybe I was creating something that other people needed. And I got an affirmation of how much I needed this community of people.
Yes, sir.
It is not, I don't think, by accident, even if it's subconscious, that the timing of running Faces of COVID for the last 2 years coincided with watching the most important person in my life fade away. My father got his terminal diagnosis in the fairly early days of the pandemic, and I had to watch him, sort of slip through my fingers, and then ultimately pass away in July of this past summer. And I needed these people who were submitting these stories to me, because as you said, it doesn't stop there. And when I was at my darkest and lowest, having that group of people who had been through unspeakable trauma to lift me up was like more than I could have ever asked for. And I think it reminded me that we all need that, right? Like, my father was an extraordinary man. And he was as I say, he was my hero. And he deserved a funeral with thousands of people packed into my synagogue that I grew up in. And instead, the Delta variant was taking off right as he passed away. And only 2 people were allowed in his hospice room at one time. And the funeral itself had to be scaled down to be outside with just a couple dozen people. And I made my peace with that, but I needed that experience of knowing that I'm not, when you lose someone who is so central to your being, as millions of people have experienced throughout this pandemic, the first thing that I feel like you think about is, how can the world move on without this person here? Like, how how are people still going to work? How come the whole world didn't shut down? Like, obviously, rationally, we understand, but like that was how I felt. And there was immediately this community of people that said, I know, how you feel and what you're going through. And, when it comes to faith, faith is very important to me. And one of the things that's very central to the way the, Jewish faith approaches death and loss is to sit with it, right? That we don't do the move on, get back up, get back to work, life goes on thing right away. We actually force ourselves to sit with the trauma and the loss and the joy of remembering who they were and the lives that they lived and all of that. And that is so connected to this experience of Faces of COVID, because all I'm really asking to my sort of fellow members of community across the country is just sit with it. Just sit with these people, sit with them, walk with them as they go through this, and just show them that you see them, right? And that alone brings us to a place, I think, of processing a loss that none of us could have ever imagined, 2.5 years ago, to say that 1 million people or more, probably quite a few more, would be taken from us from a virus that didn't exist 2.5 years ago. I think that's the beginning of how we start to, raise ourselves out of this.
It's so interesting because when you say sit with it, there's this old adage that say knowing is half the battle, and maybe a little far-fetched, but often I think, and thank you for saying not to get up quickly and move on, because I think so often in this space where the world is embracing, mental health and therapy, my experience has been that the larger percentage of promotion would be move on. They'd want you to move on and get up and go. And there's benefit to sitting with it, because you go through those initial parts of the process, and I'll just keep it 100 without faking the funk, that you're okay. So again, in your answer, there's so much there to unpack, sir. Oh God, you named the experience with your dad, who I would say is probably, and not presuming that he passed from COVID, but your dad is your hero. Where in the story, sir, and I know all of them have impacted you, but what story comes to mind when you're asked the question, what's the most impactful story? Again, yeah, I know you're a comms person, so you get it. But very sincerely, what story stood out to you the most, and everything that you named for the reasoning? And then I'll go back to a commonality that we have within our community.
So so my father actually passed away from prostate cancer. He'd been fighting it for many, many, many years, but it chose the pandemic to resurface. And so a lot of the indignities of the pandemic we experienced, but just not directly through a COVID diagnosis. So I felt very connected to it. But so I think about this question a lot, and I'm always extremely hesitant to choose one story, because as my old boss, Congresswoman Presley, used to say, there's no hierarchy of hurt, right? And so I don't like to necessarily rank them, but I will say this much: there are different kinds of stories that hit me in different ways, and they all affect me, every single one. There's the kind of obvious ones that punch you in the gut when you see people who are children or teenagers or in their 20s who had their entire lives in front of them and had that robbed of them. Well, meanwhile, everyone talks about how young people can't be impacted by COVID, and like the dissonance in that. We certainly know that's not really the case. A lot of the stories that hit me hard are the ones where the injustice is just impossible to look away from, where the people who were forced to work without proper protective gear, who got sick in the process in the line of work, or people who were forced to work while they were sick because their bosses felt as though they needed to demand that of people. Sometimes I look at the stories of the way in which we let veterans down, in particularly veterans from Vietnam and World War II, who were of an age that made them vulnerable. And our veterans' homes were some of the ground zero spots across the country of just horrific loss. I was reading a story of a gentleman out in Western Mass who liberated the Dachau concentration camp in Germany, only to die of COVID in Massachusetts, right? Like, think about that journey and what we could have done to have, mitigated some of this. Look what happened at the Holyoke Soldiers Home in Massachusetts, right? And then there's the very, obvious subtext that environmental injustice, systemic racism, medical racism, all of these different issues that were so profound before the pandemic and catalyzed by the pandemic had softened so many communities to make them more likely to be stricken with much worse consequences of this. That's on all of us. That's on decades of failed policy making that led to a moment like this. And it's so evident in so many of the stories. And so there's so many different things that hit me. But, one of the things that also hits me in a lot of these stories is not the tragedy, but who they were, and this is where it becomes really important for people to see themselves in the suffering and the pain and the loss of others. Because even before my father passed away, I'd see people submit stories and I say, that guy looks like my dad, right? Or that person could have been my sister, or that person could have been my best friend from high school, or, and it wasn't that they had some horrible, story that was shared. It was that they had a beautiful, wonderful life that reminds me of someone in my life. And that experience of just seeing ourselves, and, as Deval Patrick used to say, seeing the stakes, our stake in the dreams and aspirations of others as much of our own. That's what it means to be a part of a community. It was what it means to be, a part of a functioning society. And so much of that has leached off of the way, I think in large part because of our politics, has leached out of our civic square. And bringing that experience back of seeing our stake in each other, I think became a very, very important part of which stories I connected with and the stories I want other people to connect with, because I want you to see here in, Boston, Massachusetts, to see yourself in the story of somebody in New Mexico or Texas or Wisconsin or California, and just underscore that we are all connected and that we all have a responsibility to take care of each other right now.
Alex, again, what is exuding from you is love and humanity. And one thing, thank you for you affirmed something a little while ago when we started and wasn't, we snickered at it. But what you just affirmed for me now is, as much as we're observing so much turmoil and even the experiences of our friends and loved ones who have experienced the transition, you spoke a few minutes ago and I said I was going to go back to community, that we do have the benefit from facilitating these spaces of a new community. And so I just wanted to kind of name that and be intentional that as much as we recognize the negative that's going out there in the separation, there is a foundation of community in both settings, though the world has not room, but a canyon, for improvement when it comes to love and humanity. Mm-hmm. Now, in real time, and based on what you said and how I flow as a facilitator, and I mentioned that you move in the poly space, and I'm not going to get political, but what just came out of you a few minutes ago, I heard equity. I heard addressing social ills prior to COVID that we were aware of. For you, how has your fight for equity in many spaces been impacted by the faces of COVID? And what message would you send to the world as far as everything that you was talking about a few minutes ago that we need to address and we need to dismantle? Loaded question, but
yeah, there's a lot in there. But it's honestly, it's probably one of the most important ones when we ask this question of where do we go from here? Because one of my biggest fears, and you can feel it all around you with this kind of rush to turn the page and move on from the pandemic, is that in doing so too rapidly or without the intensity that we need to devote to processing this and to understanding it, that we are going to fail to learn the lessons that we need to learn from the last 2+ years. And, even if, I think for a lot of folks in the policymaking space, there was a sense that they understood that issues like equity and systemic racism and, environmental injustice and all these things were real issues, but they really existed for a lot of communities that were not frontline, but thinking about, policymakers that get to give a lot of speeches, right? That they exist in talking points, right? And then we got to see what the legacy of decades of this type of policymaking led to. It's all around us. There's a reason why the United States has one of the highest death rates in the entire world, for all the stories that we tell ourselves about, our greatness and make America great again, everything like that. And there's a lot of, institutions in this country that I think are great, but we have showed ourselves that we made decisions that have failed us. We've seen it. It's impossible to ignore. And my real fear is that one of the things, I feel like time has sped up a lot over the last couple of years, that experience, and that we are history is happening so rapidly we can barely keep up with it. And what I'm afraid of is that by failing to learn the lessons here, when the next thing happens, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's something that we can't even foresee right now, that the opportunity to have learned from a policy level and a public leadership level and a public health level how to address these issues, our failure to engage on that will then lead to a complete repetition of that or worse. And, the things like the kind of anti-science aggression that we've seen, from certain corners and things like that, it is, there are consequences to that. We don't just move on and start over tomorrow. We carry this with us, and what we choose to carry forward with us has incredible consequences. And so I think when you ask how has it impacted me, this is not abstract. This is real. And I know the names and I can give you the stories, right? I can say their names out loud. When you ask me, show me an example of medical racism, I've got that person. I've got 10 of them, right? When we talk about environmental justice and the impact on public health, let me show you the story of all the people from Chelsea, from Lawrence, from Mattapan, from, that have dealt with systemic environmental injustice leading to worse health outcomes due to pollution and, congestion from roads and things like that. It's right in front of us. But Deval Patrick said, policy only matters at the point where it touches people, right? And if we can't put a face and a name on it, we're missing an opportunity to connect this to people in a way that sticks with them. So
there's another person that you work with that sent the quote before she made it public. She texted to me a few weeks before. Those that are closest
to the pain should be closest to the
we'll
power.
have you preaching in here. Listen, Alex, I am intentional in spaces like this. And as I said before, this will not be your last time here. We have a spinoff of you coming in a couple of days per se. We'll end with that. But I want to end on a good note and allow, and folks, please, and they're doing it, Alex. Folks are really appreciative of your service. I told Alex about the Mother's Board and how folks in the Java Cafe will love on him because one of the things that again exudes out of you is love and humanity, but also authenticity. And so I want to ask you if you could cast a vision for where we go from here as a community, Black, white, gay, straight, young, old, poor, rich. What does Alex Goldstein's vision look like for an equitable world?
I think the way forward is that, we diagnose the problem and then we give the prescription, right? And so if I were to boil down, take zoom all the way out, go past all the policy issues and everything else, and just start at like a basic human point about what I think the problem is over the last, I don't know how many years or decades, however you want to call it, and due to so many different forces, we have watched the social fabric of this country tear and tear and tear and get thinner and thinner down to little strands and then rip. And the consequences of that are all of the policy decisions that we see. It's the way we treat each other. It is the basic fundamental view about whether you feel you have a responsibility to your neighbor you don't know, or you have no responsibility at all, and we're all on our own in the race to this imaginary finish line where the only thing that matters is myself and my household, and that we make it there safely, and whatever happens to the rest of you is not my problem. And I think we need to decide which one of those we really believe in this country. Are we a place that says that we do have a responsibility to each other and to our neighbors, especially those that we haven't met? Or are we the opposite? And if we can lean into the former and really embrace what it means to actually feel like we have a responsibility to each other, we will see that percolate through all of our policy. We will see it in the type of people who get elected to office. We will see it in the way in which we take care of each other during crisis. And it would give me a lot of hope to know that we had taken some real steps to rebuild that fabric. Or maybe it never existed and we got to build it for the first time, right? Like, I'm not even willing to say that we ever had that figured out. And so maybe we got to start over, but that is the way forward. And I think that what's special about Faces of COVID is that you get to start that process, and all you have to do is just take 30 seconds and say out loud the name and the story of someone you've never met who is no longer in this world, and say that that is a loss to all of us. That is how it starts. And to say to that family who is grieving and say, you know what? I don't know you, but I love you. And I am sorry for what you've been through. And we are here to tell you that you're not forgotten and that you are seen, right? Just those simple acts. They don't ask for your political affiliation at the door to say that to people, right? And so we can, no, and so we can, I think we can use that. And that hopefully Faces of COVID can continue to serve as a platform for that, which is to check all of everything else at the door. Just show up as an empathetic person, prepared to show a little love to people who have been through a lot. And if all of us can commit to a little bit of that, like, we're already headed in the right direction.
That part, Alex, I got excited because I used the word percolate a lot. Coffee job, percolate. And so thank you for that affirmation.
I'm glad I like that word too.
But what I last heard there was, as much as we both want policy at a macro level, the love, the humanity, and the authenticity can be influenced. It's not influenced by an elected. It's not influenced by a spouse, or it could be a loved one or whatever. But it almost goes to Whitney's song, "The Greatest Love of All." Inside of me, I had to remember the words. And so it does start with us, and it stands out to me because I had I think it was Eugene Schneeberg on the other day that wrote a book about fatherhood, and we started talking some level of personal responsibility. And it's a slippery slope when we start talking about the ability to get past the systemic stuff. Yep. And personal responsibility when we start talking about certain things. But at the end of the day, in this particular case, it does come down to the fact of saying just 3 words and changing the last word. I love you, or for I care about you, and I share in your experience. And I confuse empathy and sympathy all the time. But sir, today having you here, one, I hope was a little cathartic for you to talk about it in a public space. 2, I have to say that building with you here today is so encouraging to me. And we often look for and are readily to embrace support, and guidance from our familiarity and our familiar circle. And sir, yeah, I'm not going to pick up this rag no more today. I'm going to keep it together, and we'll end on it, and we'll tease it a little bit. But you talked a little bit about climate change. You talked about a little bit about environmental justice, and let's just keep it 100. We'll talk a little bit more with the team on it Thursday, but there is some inequities around environment and climate. Set a stage for what I'm going to announce on Thursday that folks are coming to talk about, just wellness and equity, and how we as a community be in spaces together everywhere. I think that was a good way to surmise it.
Yeah, no, it's a great setup. You know, I think the one of the things the pandemic has taught us is that public health and open space and environmental health are all deeply, deeply interrelated. And for, you know, the history and legacy of who gets open space, who gets clean air, who gets clean water, you know, that is a tortured legacy in this country. And there is so much that we need to do to unwind decades of policymaking that has made it so that certain communities get to enjoy public benefits like a waterfront and certain communities do not. And we have some tools that I think are coming available to us here in Massachusetts, specifically in Boston. It's a project that I'm working on related to how to create something like the waterfront, which is a public good. It belongs to all of us, and making it a space that actually actualizes that that right that people have to have open space and clean air and clean water, and how deeply connected that is to mental wellness and physical wellness. And so we got a lot more to say about that. I won't give it all away, but this is, you know, these things are deeply, deeply intersectional. And I think there's a lot of exciting things starting to happen in the city in that space that will be good for all of us, and is frankly very much connected to what we've just been through, and what we need to do to get our way back into the light. So it should be a great conversation.
Listen, I enjoyed you, and there are things folks are in here. They want me to let you know the Java loves you, Alex. Please know that your mother, Pastor Mary and Mother Mary, is telling us to take care of each other. And Teresa saying, "Thank you, Alex, for caring, loving, and showing godly favor to those who we have lost." Eric says, "What you are sharing is helping me." It's helping me heal and also cultivate compassion. And so if man, it just, these are some of the things that happen, Alex, in real time, that this community, as much as they say I help them, they help me a whole lot. That's it for us today. I will say, I will start paying some bills while Alex is on this Thursday. I have the privilege and opportunity of talking with some of Alex's team, who is working on some equity around the waterfront and around promoting wellness. And I'll just say this young man on the screen right now is the foundation for what I've been teasing with you all about Java on the waterfront. So it's
gonna be great. We got a big summer ahead. We're gonna have a good time.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm glad, sir, that we were able to end this segment with laughing. There is a question here: how can folks contact you? If you go to, you're mainly on Twitter, right? Faces of COVID. I'll put it right here. We do this banner stuff in the real time, Alex. At FACE, capital OF, capital FAC. I noticed that yesterday.
And then my Twitter handle is Alex J Goldstein. My messages are always open, so anyone can get in touch that way as well.
Alex J GOLSTEIN. Period.
No, it's just at Alex J Goldstein.
All one word.
Yeah.
All right.
If I drop, can I chat it in here right now? Will that?
Yeah, you could put it in the private chat, but I think I got it. But
right, cool.
You tell me because I've made mistakes before and had to edit. Is this right?
That's right. That's
okay.
it. That's my personal Twitter, so people can reach out right there. It was great.
Alex, I appreciate you, sir. We are definitely going to have you back. I'm looking forward to the team coming on Thursday. And you know that at any time I'm here. I'm looking forward to building upon a lot of the intersectionality that we've had in the past years, but a lot of what you said before we went live and what you said today, it really helped me a lot. And so I'm going to let you go before I need my rag again.
Well, let me just say thank you for building this sacred space, because it is a sacred space, and it is to have creators and compassionate people building new spaces that aren't conventional, that allow people to engage and talk about hard stuff and just create the air to breathe to go into some of these issues is so incredibly valuable. And you are an inspiration to myself and many people. So please keep it up, my friend.
Alex, I appreciate you, sir. And you I'm going to get you, because I said I wasn't going to use the rack again, but we'll talk, sir. And I did notice, and I'm sure I'll get a text about it, you and I have that same head dip when we say something. So I noticed that as well. There's kindredness here, sir. And I look forward to it. That goes beyond life experience, social, economic background, or whatever, race, sexual preference, or whatever. I count you as brother, sir. And I appreciate you. And we are going to do some great things to address inequities wherever you and I can put our feet and hands into, and our heart, most importantly.
Let's go. I'm ready.
I appreciate you, sir. And y'all, when Alex says let's go, that's a lot. All right, sir. We'll be in touch.
Take care.
It was definitely awesome having this good, I'll say, new friend and brother in the cafe with me. And timing is everything, because we crossed paths back in over the Patrick campaign. And this is 22, 16 or so, 17 years later, we're connecting. Thank all of you for being in the room today. We're going to get ready to wrap up. Listen, if you are an entity or if you are an individual that is an artist, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I am having Brother Michael Bobbitt, who is from the Massachusetts Arts. Oh, Jesus. I don't have the card in front of me again, but just know this. He's coming in to talk with us about processes and resources available to artists. If you are a cultural or artistic programming entity, Massachusetts has money available for you. There's a process, you got to apply, but it's available. He's going to come and talk about that opportunity and resources that are available to you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And then on Thursday, I have the opportunity to host some of Alex's team. They're going to come on and talk about, continue the conversation about equity and wellness, specifically around the waterfront. And so I told y'all we're going to do a Java on the waterfront this summer. I got a first meeting about it next week, and we'll get the date out to you all. June, I'm telling you all, June is going to be a very, very percolating menu. The 3rd or the 4th, the 11th, the 12th. Save the date, June 12th, Lord Jesus, June 12th, 2022. I believe we said 3 p.m. Java with Jimmy is doing a special Sunday Java at the African American Meeting House on Joy Street in Beacon Hill. More information is coming about that. Then we have the week of Juneteenth, hosting quite a few events there. Then we have BAMS Fest on the 18th, and then we have the Yoga in the Park on the 19th. And then there are all the Pride events that are going on in June. And so June is going to be very crazy. That's why I'm out of here on July 4th. You all have a wonderful Testimony Tuesday. I will see you guys tomorrow. And Pastor Marion said she's coming on the 12th. Thank you, Sister Debbie. Ma is saying thank you to Alex. Mama Java, good to see you in the room. Good morning, everybody. I missed a few folks that came in after we started with Alex, but good to see you all in the room as always. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for your patience. And that is it. Tomorrow is We Need to Know Wednesday. And so Michael Bobbitt will be with us to talk about the resources available for artists and cultural and artistic entities. And so please come and check that out. Appreciate you, Elder Heidi. And that is it for me, y'all. We will see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. This is my last day supposedly being on D&D, but got a couple of meetings, and yeah. All right, y'all, have a wonderful, awesome Testimony Tuesday, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. with the Mass Arts Council. I think I'll have it right by tomorrow, and when the flyer comes out shortly. Peace, y'all.